Okay guys, well this video is going to be a little bit different than a lot of the other ones because I'm going to go back into part of the ways that my early faith evolved. And I think this might be interesting, particularly to Omnists who are coming from a Christian background, who may still be Christian or simply, on their way out of it into a somewhat broader world. Whatever you are, when I was in my late teens, I read the Bible a number of times. Of course, I had it read to me my entire life, and I like to read every different version of it I possibly could. I had a big one with 8 different versions in it, and I got into the Greek and I got into the Hebrew. And what I found really interesting this one day was that when you have been raised on these stories your whole life, you read them. Every time you read the Bible, you read that exact story. It doesn't matter what the Bible actually says. That story is what you read. And I was reading Genesis for the umpteenth time, because you know how you read the Bible. You read Genesis and then you get sidetracked and you have to go back and you have to start over. And so you wind up reading Genesis, I don't know how many times. You get lost in the beget somewhere. But I was reading this part of the Bible, and we all know this story, where Eve gets separated from Adam. She goes wandering out in the forest where she's not supposed to be, and she runs into the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And the devil convinces her to eat the fruit, or some people think it was an apple. Of course, it probably was not an apple. It was just a fruit. Some people think maybe a fig. And she takes it, and she takes it to her husband, and Adam, and he says, "Oh no, what have you done?" And he eats of it, and we're all screwed. And it's all the woman's fault. And a problem with this is it has been one of those stories that has been used to seriously belittle women over the years. It has been very much a part of the Christian tradition, or at least it used to be. Fortunately, we are moving out of it, or most Christians are moving out of it. But for a long time, that was very much used to sort of blame women for the fall of man. Well, this one day, I'm reading through Genesis, and for some reason this time, I'm reading it a little more literally. I don't know why. I think it's one of those things that I just read it so many times that I just didn't really even read it anymore. And I realized that it never mentioned Eve straying away from her husband. It never says that. Never says anything about that. She just comes up to the tree. And the serpent, and we never hear that the serpent is Satan or the devil or anything like that. It's just a serpent. That's all that's ever stated in the Bible. The rest of it is very much Christian tradition, when people have tried to re-mythologize that in other ways. But he convinces Eve to eat the apple. And in the Bible, and this is exactly what it says she did eat of the fruit and gave also to her husband who was with her. Who was with her? What do you mean? It sort of blew my mind. Heaven knows I'd read that enough times. I grabbed out a couple other versions that all said pretty much the same thing. Adam was with her at the tree. He just wasn't saying anything. Well, that was kind of odd. He was just sort of standing there, and she was talking with the serpent, and he was just sort of dumbfounded, I guess, and he just let her make the decision. This is interesting to me because, and I'm not trying to rewrite Christianity. I'm not trying to make some massive statement. I've had people who've argued with me over that and said, well, when it said that her husband was with her, it meant that it simply meant he was her husband. It meant with her. It didn't mean with her at the tree. Even though some versions actually say with her at the tree. But what is interesting about it is how dangerous it can be not to read, and not to read literally, and not to go over things, because we do have these traditions, these odd ways that we've mythologized what is even said within, well, let's say our mythology, and the traditions that we've grown up with, and we don't read them, we don't question them, and we don't look at them again. It was absolutely mind-blowing to me that women had this awful sort of stigma over this one ridiculous part of the Bible, which was completely different than the way we read it traditionally. It's not in there. Please, everybody, go back to Genesis. Read it. It's not in there. Obviously, that is not the type of thing that matters to me greatly these days. As an Omnist, I don't necessarily care too individually what mythologies state, but I think that these are the types of things that we do have to bring up to people, that we do have to remind people, that we do have to remind ourselves. You'll often hear me talk about homosexuality. That was another one of those things that I remember getting into the Bible and saying, okay, look, homosexuality, what does it really say? Well, it says, and this is the law. The law is that that man should not lie with animal. By that, they meant sex. Man should not lie with animal. That woman should not lie with animal. And that man shouldn't lie with man. So I guess you can be a lesbian. That's okay. I remember thinking a lot about that and thinking, well, you know, what all of those three things have in common is penetration. Right? Women can't technically penetrate each other, at least not in that way. And it quickly occurred to me that like many of the other laws, many of the other Mosaic laws, like unclean meat, there was nothing arbitrary about it. They were not, God didn't just randomly say, oh, well, I don't want you to eat pigs. It was because they didn't want people to get sick. And it was entirely possible to me, and this was a theory I used to put forth to people at the time. Some people went, oh, that's interesting. Some people went, oh my God, you're a horrible person. But I think it is entirely possible that the whole reason for that was that they didn't want a spread of disease. It was not referring to relationships. I'm not sure if back then they were really seriously considering the possibility of homosexual relationships. What they were worried about was disease, and men having sex with other men having sex with animals, women having sex with animals. Those are all three things which may not be a problem these days, but you know, certainly were back in those days. And of course that got passed up into Paul. Paul you know, mirrored some of those statements, but that was a long time later. Probably, I don't know, 1,500 years later that he was reading that. And the point being that when we read these rules, any rules, a lot of people take the Bible as if it was written all at once, and it wasn't. When the New Testament writers were writing, they were often looking back at things that had been written 1,000 years ago, 1,500 years ago, or possibly more. We actually don't know how long ago those things existed in oral tradition. And so the way that we believed those things meant had become so powerful in our cultures, in Jewish culture and then in Christian culture, that people didn't really go back and look at it. And so I just put this forth to anyone of any religious tradition or someone who's partially in a religious tradition. Read the books. Always, always read the books. And try to look at them with as fresh an eye as you possibly can. And it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy. I can't believe how many times I read the same things, and no matter how many times I read through them, I still saw the same thing that my parents had told me when I was 5 years old, because frankly, it's hard to read things with completely fresh eyes. But try it. It's important, for whatever that's worth. I'm the Urban Omnist. I'll see you guys later.